Today's conversation is one about history, but also about now, about 1968 and about 2026, about who gets control over their own body and who never truly has, about the quiet, complicated ways parents try to protect their children and the unintended harm that can hide inside what's best. It's about the tension between safety and freedom, between acceptance and autonomy, and between love and control. We're excited we get to talk with a podcast favorite, Kate Schatz, about her new book, Where the Girls Were, in today's episode. And we really dive into everything we mentioned above and more. So if this resonates, please share this episode with someone you care about. We think this is a book and a conversation that everyone should be having and reading about right now. Would you please reintroduce yourself to our listeners?
Oh, yes. Hello, my name is Kate Schatz, and I am an author. Thanks for having me.
And a TV fixer for your parents' television and all of the things that we do at our generation.
Yes, I am also tech support to my parents. That's what I was doing right before I joined you. So good news, everybody. They can now get HBO. My mom says it's because she wants to watch The Pit, but I think it's because she wants to watch Heated Rivalry. So...
I love it. I love it. So we are so lucky to have crossed paths several times before. We've talked about Do the Work with you and W. Kamau Bell. Sarah read Rad American Women A to Z with her kids as a staple bedtime book before she ever knew we would speak to you. I've talked personally about Rad American History A to Z, which is also like required reading at my kids' school for sixth graders. And you even joined us in person as a partner to host our book launch of Dear White Women in San Francisco, which was like almost 5 years and alternately a million years ago.
So a million years ago.
Roughly, yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay. But this is a different conversation than in the past because this time you wrote a historical fiction novel, which we are super excited about. So can you tell us first why fiction this time and why this book now? Like, let's just go real softball, easy questions.
Great. Why did I write a novel? It's funny because I was talking to a friend recently about this exact question, and it's a friend who I've known for a very, very long time. And she was kind of reminding me that fiction is what I used to do, what I always did. Like when I was kind of starting out as a writer for years, I was a fiction writer. And so it's, I think, because I found success in publishing and as an author in nonfiction, that's what people obviously associate me with. That's the work they associate me with. But prior to that happening, fiction writing was my thing. It's what I focused on. It's what I did my undergraduate degree on. It's what I got my MFA in. It's what I've always loved. And this novel that we're talking about is one that I've actually been working on for many, many years. It was always in the background while I was working on all of these other books. Sometimes I've compared it to that relationship, that person you keep going back to over the years. I would always kind of go back to the novel. She was always there in the background waiting, and I'd go and work on it, and then I'd get distracted by a shiny new project. But it was always there. So fiction, I'd say, is my first love as a writer. It was my first love as a reader. And it's what I've always really, really loved to do.
So, I am the type of reader where I always look at the dedications first because I want to see.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
Okay.
First thing I do. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I want to see, who is this book for in some way, right? And I read the dedication in Where the Girls Were to your mom. And then I read the author's note at the end because I was like, oh, that's so lovely. This is dedicated to her mom. And then I read the author's note and I was like, oh, this is dedicated to her mom, because I didn't realize just how personal this book was for you and for your family. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the book is called Where the Girls Were, and it's a fictional account. It's a completely made up story that's inspired by my mom's experiences. So the book is set in 1968, and it's about a teenage girl in the San Francisco Bay Area who gets unexpectedly pregnant and is sent away to a maternity home and forced to surrender her child for adoption. And it's about the kind of baby scoop era, as that time is often referred to, in the decades before American women had access to safe legal abortion. And my mom had that experience herself when she was a teenager in the 60s. And my mom's story is something I didn't know about at all until I was in my 20s. And it's something that she'd kept secret, didn't talk to anybody about, because that's what happened with these young women who were sent away. You were basically told, don't tell anybody, don't ever talk about it. We're going to make this go away and you're going to get back to your life and move on and nobody needs to know. So when my mom told me all of this when I was in my 20s, I was so moved and heartbroken and also really shocked and really fascinated. And as I say in the author's note, as someone who, even as a young person, I was a feminist. I was fascinated by feminist histories. I was a women's studies major. I really felt like I understood the history of the women's movement. Yet this is something I had never heard of, this phenomenon of these girls basically getting disappeared and sent away. And it was completely new information to me. So it really sent me down a rabbit hole for years of learning about it and doing a lot of research. And then I'm really wanting to write this book. And again, to go back to your question of why fiction, I certainly could have written this as a memoir. I could have written this as nonfiction, but it felt like it was a story that I wanted to dig into, and I wanted to kind of make up a world, and also in fictionalizing it, and again, inspired by my mom's story, but not at all her story, I could give my characters moments and opportunities and chances that my mom didn't get to have. And so I think that's part of what's empowering about storytelling is, and especially historical fiction, is you can allow for things to happen that didn't actually get to happen.
I appreciate that so much. And it's amazing when people from the older generation entrust us with stories. First, that in and of itself is such a gift, but that idea of sharing stories is really powerful. And you think about the fact that people didn't even understand how pregnancy happened until the early 1900s, right? We didn't know what made people get pregnant. And then you see people now still not talking about adoption, abortion, these choices that openly. I mean, it is such an incredible thing to be able to share the story and sort of understand what it might feel like to be in people's shoes in that time when things were still very new and not as developed. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because we're talking about that sort of mom-child relationship, was this idea of look, we love our kids. We all want what's best for our kids, right? And what we think is best for them is often shaped by our own life experiences. And this idea of best can be physical safety, their social acceptance, what their heart tells them is true for them. And you touch on a lot of these in your novel, but that parent-child relationship that you talk about in your book was so raw, was so real. And we think about often what Rose told Baker, your characters, that she should be happy that her parents still accepted her and that they were going to help by sending her away. It was it brought tears to my eyes reading that section. How do you navigate thinking about what's best for your children as a parent? And what part of your life experiences weigh in on some of those tricky situations where what's best could be interpreted in so many different ways?
Oh, God. Yes. And great question. And that's something that I was really trying to explore in the book. This is a really it's a hard history to learn about. It's really shocking, and when I first heard about this, you got sent away, grandma and grandpa did this, right? This was really difficult to wrap my head around. But as I thought about it more and learned more and did a lot of research and kind of talked to my mom over the years, it became clear to me again, this is people protecting their kid and doing the best that they can. And like you said, that changes over time. And it was really important to me in this book that I wanted it to be nuanced, and I didn't want anybody to necessarily be a villain, right? I didn't want her mother, who, really orchestrates this and sends her away. I didn't want her to be a monster or a jerk for doing this. I wanted to show the complexity of, the choices that we make as parents. And, it's interesting. I'm getting to my answer to your actual question here, but I was actually with my mom last night. We just actually went away for a night to she just reread the book again. And we kind of went to process and talk about it and talking about her memories, what she does and doesn't remember. So my mom's in her, I think my mom Oh gosh, sorry, Mom. I think my mom's 78. Um, we're talking about something that happened almost 60 years ago, right? And what she recalls and doesn't recall. And she was actually saying, she says, I don't remember my mom. Well, there's all these deep aspects of my mom's story that she just has no idea. She doesn't know how some things happened. She doesn't know why she ended up where she did, And so she was kind of saying, I don't remember my mom ever talking to me about this part of the plan. Like, I don't remember her ever asking, she just kind of told me this is what's happening. And I said to her, I was like, well, Mom, of course, you were 17. Like, why would she was figuring it out. And I said, that's what I do with my kids. Like it's made me think of all the things that I coordinate for my children and plan, just even logistically, like, from summer camps to signing my daughter up for the SATs, right? There's a lot that we just kind of do as parents. But then when it comes to really, really difficult things, there's a lot that we don't tell our kids. There's a lot that we orchestrate for their comfort and for their safety. And a lot of times does have to do with them not knowing everything or not knowing all the information, right? They're not always, and I think I'm very open with my kids, and I'm, very lucky that I haven't had to navigate something like this with my kids. But there's so many choices that we make for them because we're their parents and we know best, and they're not always involved in all of that. So it was interesting to hear my mom, even 60 years later, say, well, why didn't my mom tell me about that? And for me to say, well, Mom, she probably didn't want you didn't need to be involved. You were a teenager.
That is really interesting. And, I think, and I can see it from the teenage perspective of like, of course, now I want to know all these things. And then from the parent perspective of like, but obviously I'm doing this to protect you. I'm doing this because I believe that this is the right thing to do. And it also makes me think about, memory in terms of time, right? And how that is fluid. And certain things really stand out and certain things are completely sort of leveled, right, over time. But that also takes me into kind of my next question, which you talked about a little bit, because this entire book takes place in 1968, and which was really a key year in our country's history. I mean, just a couple of big things happened, but those events are those events in time where you remember where you were, right? When you heard that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, you remember where you were when the same thing for RFK, right? And the Vietnam War protests and all of that. And so I love that it's featured, those events are featured in your book, or it's really set within the history of that specific year. And so how and why was it really important to kind of weave that into this fictional story?
Yeah, I think, and this is an example of, why fiction, right? Why I did this again. And actually, my mom's pregnancies, neither of her pregnancies happened in 1968. It was actually in 1966 and then 67 that she was pregnant. But I chose 1968. I could because I get to, right? Because I'm the writer and I get to choose. Because it's been a year that I've always been really fascinated with. So just in my own kind of research of kind of the political history of the US, like I've always found that to be such a fascinating, pivotal year. And, and I think for this story too, because I was also interested in how the kind of summer of love and the kind of hippie era kind of clashed up against what was actually legally available for women, right? So this idea of free love and kind of counterculture and women being, maybe sexually free and having kind of the exploring in this countercultural way, but then actually still not having access to abortion and barely having access to birth control. So, and then again, I really wanted to set the book. I wanted to have this very personal, intimate story about one person, but I wanted to set it against the kind of intensely dramatic backdrop of the United States at this time. And so, 68 was, I went for, again, the assassinations of MLK and then Bobby Kennedy, the escalation of the Vietnam War. And then, it's funny, when I was in high school, I did a research project on the Democratic Convention of 1968, and I found that I was really fascinated by it. I was like a little bit obsessed in a way that only a nerdy history dork would be. But I've always found that convention and that time really fascinating, in part because of the way that protest was televised really for the first time, right? So that's when the phrase "the whole world is watching" was coined. And it was seen as kind of a turning point in the anti-war movement. Yeah. And I was also really fascinated by it. So I chose to set it then. Also the music. Great music.
I love that. You're talking to me, Sasha, the other totally nerdy history buff on the call. So
I'm here for all of it. Yep. Would have done the same thing. So probably did do the same thing. So yep. Love it.
I love also, though, like the fact that knowing your previous work and our past conversations, like turning the page and seeing some of those things mentioned, I literally smiled. I was on an airplane reading this book and I was literally smiling, being like, of course she does put it. Like it seemed very consistent for you to not ignore the context in which a story is set. Like that is such an important thing to discuss and not just be like it's one story in a vacuum. So I appreciate so much that you thoughtfully did that, and it did not surprise me at all. I love it. I love it. I love it.
I'll tell you, I mean, I went even in earlier drafts, there was way more. And then at some point, I think my editor was, I love you. And I love that you're so into all of the external historical political details, but like some of them might have to go. So I'll tell you that there was more.
Gotta love the editors and the teamwork that goes into making it. It was such a good book. Like I really enjoyed it and I can't wait for everyone to read it. I have a random tiny question and I don't know why this jumped out at me. Okay. Your book is in several parts. I can't remember how many, but at the start of part 2, there's a moment that I don't know why I marked it, but Baker runs her hands along birds that another character, Anna, has created. And then you have this chilling quote that hit me. It was like, I am no bird and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you, which was from a copy of, I think it was Jane Eyre that had once belonged to a different character. Like these birds, like what's the deal? What is the significance of that quote to you?
Oh, so I love that. So the main character, Baker, the protagonist, she's a real bookworm and she really, really loves to read. And so the story of Jane Eyre kind of becomes, and a copy of it becomes kind of this little through line in the book. And she's often kind of quoting from it and reading from it. And I mean, I loved it as just like the thought of her kind of reading that book and loving these lines and having them in their head. And yeah, the idea of, I mean, I think I was really interested in kind of the idea of the Gothic novel. And I see this book as a kind of Gothic, they're kind of trapped in this house. It's intended, the second part of it in particular is intended to feel kind of suffocating. And there is this idea of these girls kind of being shut away and trapped. And so, yeah, I think that there's a little bit of a bird metaphor that comes in here and there. And I just was the idea of these like sad little ceramic birds sitting on a windowsill, a window that's locked. Actually, in that scene, you realize that the window doesn't actually open. And I liked the idea of these sad little birds inside, but the idea that she, through literature, has access to ideas about freedom. And I think that that's kind of one thing I wanted to explore, is that a lot of her concepts of freedom and kind of empowerment have come through the books that she's read, right? She's not getting it in her daily life. She's not getting it from her family. She's not getting it from society. She's actually been getting it through books.
I love that. And Sarah asked such a specific question down to the page. Now I'm going to ask a giant sort of holistic question, just to completely reverse track, and I'm asking this because you're you. And I've been waiting to ask this question. I was like, Sarah, this is the one question I need to ask Kate, because I can't help but notice, I think everyone can't help but notice that we are sliding back into a world where abortion may not be a right. And it is not a right for many women and girls in many states now, right? And I was raving about your book over the weekend on a walk with my friend. And we were both born in 1977 and 1978. And so we recognized that, I was born in a very specific window of time and group of women where I've had the right to get an abortion, aka control over my own body, for my entire reproductive life. And despite having, I think, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, this is the lawyer in me coming out, was that one real challenge to it. And I remember getting a t-shirt that said, keep abortion legal unless George Bush is free to babysit, and wearing that all over my high school.
Of course you did.
Of course I did.
You did.
Of course. Yeah. But, there was not really that sort of immediate threat, right? That we were going to lose this. And it terrifies me that our children may not be able to say the same, right? So what I'm really curious about, because you did so much research and really dove into this time period, like what did that tell you about how society is fundamentally different? It fundamentally changes if we lose that right.
Oh yeah, and actually I really appreciate that framing because I'm the same age. I was born in 78, and that's actually hadn't I've never thought about it in that particular way, that yeah, that we are a really particular generation who were born after the Roe decision. And now it's, my childbearing years are done. Right. And so I was able to actually, yeah, grow up and come into womanhood and experience my pregnancies and childbirth and become a mother in this particular window of time when we had constitutionally protected right to abortion in this country. And that is not the case for my daughter or for my sons. Yeah. And that wasn't my mom's experience, right? Like, so we are really this particular, 44 decade slice of people. Wow. And yeah. And so now, certainly, this is, I'll tell you, this is like, I feel like I should be careful with this anecdote because it's a soundbite that can sound terrible, but I'll say it. When the Dobbs decision happened and when Roe was overturned, I remember getting an email from my agent who was, she said, well, I guess maybe it's good for the book, right? It was like the terrible joke that we were making, like, well, I guess maybe this helps the novel. It's even more relevant. Womp womp. And yeah, why is it important? It's so important. And I've been such a deeply pro-choice person my whole life. I also wore pro-choice t-shirts in high school all the time. I love that. We totally would have hung out, and we are absolutely sliding back. And it's always been, the right to an abortion, reproductive rights, reproductive justice and freedom is about control. It's about the patriarchy. It's about women having the ability to make decisions for themselves, right? It's about the ability to make decisions about our health, about our families, right? So you take that away, and it's one of many steps toward stripping women of their autonomy, of their safety, and of their power. And it's critical, and it's chilling, and it's devastating to see. And it's wild still for me to think that that is the reality for kids. And I do hope that that's a big part of what this book does, is get people to, to think about it and to feel that reality and to get this small sense of what it was like not that long ago, right? Really, truly not that long ago. And I think that's, to me, one of the things that's always, fascinating about history and reading histories is, this is this stuff that seems so different from now. It is not that long ago that it was like this, that these things happen, right? This is not a million years ago. This is pretty recent history. And now we, again, are in the moment where we're seeing how quickly things do change.
Totally. I feel like we could just let loose and have such a long conversation around so many of these other subtopics. But is there anything in particular that we haven't asked that you want to share with listeners?
Oh, no, these are great questions. I love this. I love telling you about one tiny sentence on a page, and I love talking about the macro. And I think that's what I love about this form of storytelling, and it's really different from my other books. In part, I realized too, with my other books, I've had the ability to just jam so many different things in so many different time periods and like all this stuff. And so to write a book that is, a much more sustained deep dive into a moment and a particular history it was a real challenge for me. It was really fun. And, I think that's why you're seeing me, still, getting all the little political moments in the background was kind of, I think, part of my impulse is, I just want to include all of these things. So no, these are great questions. Good job.
I think about so much of this as I have two teenage girls. This is not so much a formulated question, it's just more of a conversation. And I think so, I still think back to the one Midwestern senator who was making rules against abortion. And he was asked, why do you think women get an abortion? And like on video, and he was like, I've never thought of that. And like, I hope that this book opens the conversation, obviously centers right now, like in this book, teenagers, but the number of grown married women, like people have abortions all the time. But one of the things that struck me was that not always are the men aware. And people like that, whether that it was that senator or people's partners, like women are doing this to take care of themselves and their families all the time. And just because you don't know doesn't mean it's not happening. And so I really hope this like blows open that conversation and allows us to, like your mother bravely did with you, and hopefully maybe we can share with other people. Like we can really start having more open conversations about the reality of this need, this right to take care of our health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I that is definitely something that I do kind of try to get at in the book is, the importance of telling these stories and talking about what's happening and what we do, but also acknowledging all of the reasons that people don't tell these stories, and again, to go back to, what you said at the beginning, these secrets and these things that we, don't talk about, and especially with mothers and the choices that we make, right? There's a lot of times people aren't sharing these stories because they're trying to stay safe, right? Because they can't talk about them. And I think I don't know spoilers, but there's a scene in the book where Baker is with her mother and her mother is kind of sharing a lot of stories that Baker had no idea about. And I hope, and I think that is a scene that will feel familiar for a lot of people. I think there is that kind of, again, a moment where you become an adult and you suddenly realize all the things you never knew or that nobody ever told you and all the family secrets that no one ever talked about. And you start to see your parents as just humans, right? Not necessarily peers, but you see them in a different light and you realize all the things that again, nobody told you about. And so there's a lot of reasons that people don't talk about their abortions and their choices. And I think it's complicated because on the one hand, ideally it's nobody's business, right? Ideally, you actually don't need to tell anybody, right? Ideally, you have the right to privacy, which, Roe was actually decided on, right? Like the right to abortion, the constitutionally protected right to abortion was actually never about the right to actually have an abortion in terms of the medical procedure. It was about the right to privacy and for people to be able to make private decisions about their health and their family and their body. And so on the one hand, I absolutely believe in that. And I think nobody should have to talk about it if they don't want to. But we live in a time where it's so weaponized and so politicized that it is actually becoming essential that we do talk about it, which is really unfair, but also really empowering. And the more that we do talk about it, the less stigmatized it is. And again, the more that maybe senators and men and, people will realize how common it is. And again, all of the reasons, that people do seek this out as an option. I see me, Sasha, nodding when I'm talking. The lawyer stuff. You're like, yes.
I love a good right to privacy discussion. So doesn't everyone? Yeah. But, I really appreciate this because I just think about the power of storytelling and the power of storytelling, especially now where we have been able to see when you individualize a wrong, right? And I think about this in particular with ICE or, that individualizing, that bringing it down to a 5-year-old who's being pulled, from the street and taken to a detention center 1,300 miles away, right? Like that story changes people's opinions about things. And so that's what I hope for this book as well, that even though this is a fictional character, it is a very real concept. And so to think about those stories and to have, because my friend that I was talking to about this was like, she's like, well, you have to tell me when it's out because I want to have it as part of my book club. And I was like, well, A, absolutely. But B, like, how great is it to be able to have that forum to discuss? And maybe those forums get bigger and bigger, right? So.
Yeah. And with this in particular, this very particular kind of phenomenon, right, of these women in the 1950s and 60s who went away either to maternity homes or kind of other setups, because there were kind of, in addition to the homes, there were kind of there was some other ways. Some women, and actually this did happen to my mom, that some people, if you were pregnant, you would go into a private home. So there were actually families that would take in a private girl, and basically you would work for them, and you kind of be protecting them from the rest of the world. But my point is that it has been remarkable to me how many stories I have now heard in the years that I've been working on this book and talking about it. It feels like almost everyone of our generation has a story about someone of our mother's generation who went away, right? I mean, so many people are like, oh, that happened to my aunt, or, oh, wow, I just learned that that happened to my grandma, or, oh, and then I talk to people who are of my mom's age, women who are in their 70s and their 80s, it's like, if it didn't happen to them, like almost certainly they can remember someone from high school or a neighbor or a cousin or an aunt who experienced this. And I've already been hearing from readers. Actually, my publicist, when he told his mom about this book, she shared that his grandmother had gone through a similar situation. So I think that when I think about this book being read in book clubs and being shared, I anticipate that there's going to be a lot of people who either share stories like this from their family that they know, or in talking about it, will learn these stories from other people.
I love that. Well, let us know. When is it coming out?
Oh, it comes out Tuesday, March 3rd, which is, it's a month from today. I just looked at what the date is. We're recording this on February 3rd. So it comes out 1 month from today. Oh my gosh.
Very, very exciting. Everyone should go out and get this book and tell their friends about it and talk to the older generation about it too. Let's see what you all hear.
Yes, absolutely.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.